I found a new strategy for drinking more water. It's these little bottles. I don't know why we have, actually I do know why we have them, but they're frustratingly small and not satisfying enough to drink one. So I'm like on my 8th one this morning, and I look like there's 8 ounces in each one of these. So I'm drinking a lot more water. So if you're just struggling to hydrate yourself, get little bottles of water. You will drink 15 of them. I'm not entirely sure why we have a can of pears up here, but if there's something I'm supposed to know about that, somebody's going to have to let me know. All right. Give food to the food pantry. I thought it was a message to me about I need more fruit and fiber in my diet, but I'm learning over and over the world is not about me. The world is about our food pantry, and it needs you to bring pears, not peaches. Fruit and vegetables, cans of fruit and vegetables. You can bring those, and the display is out in the foyer. You can also leave those in the office during the week. We'd love for you to do that. G2 groups, including mine, would love to set a goal and participate in that actively. All right? We'd love for you to do that. So, with that transition, let me say this. Every week that I stand up here, my battle, that's probably too strong of, it's not a battle. The challenge that I face is to come at you with the assumption, this is going to sound bad, that you're not interested in what I'm about to say. And it's not because I believe little of you. It makes me work hard at trying to be relevant at what I'm going to speak and say. So I assume that you're more interested in what you're going to do after church than you are with what I'm going to say. And that, if it hurts your feelings, I'm sorry. And that's a good sign if it hurts your feelings. If it speaks directly to you, you need some help. So listen to what I'm going to say. We at Covenant, our culture, our aim, our ambition is to say that we don't want to satisfy ourselves with just knowing about God, right? We want to know about God, but we don't want to satisfy ourselves with just knowing about Him, because the ultimate call and the invitation of Jesus is for you to enter into relationship, which means there's experience there, that you're interacting with God. My ultimate goal, if I have goals, is this large. My hope, the thing that drives me, is that you would begin to experience interactive relationship with God on a very regular basis. And my G2 group is entering into something at the end of a study, and the challenge is literally, I sound like Blake Shelton on The Voice now, literally, every other word, literally. The challenge literally is to do a day with Jesus, to learn to spend the duration of a day, not just bookends, right? Not just, hey, good morning, God, hey, good night, God, with maybe a thank you for my lunch, but to go with God in and through. That's the experience. Now, to do that, to get to those kinds of things, we need to know what God is like, obviously, and we need to see some big pictures of how He moves and interacts with us, and some of the things that God does to bring us into relationship and to edify or correct us are just flat out strange. They're not how we would function. They're not, and so when He does those things, if we don't teach those things and kind of put those before you, we will not recognize them as God's activity. And where we're going with that this morning is a series on the minor prophet, minor because they're just smaller, not less significant, prophet of Habakkuk. And what Habakkuk does is just a 3-chapter book. It's 3 chapters, and God is having a dialogue with a prophet. Now, in the Old Testament, God would raise up, in times before Jesus, raised up a prophet, and a prophet did not, the primary function of a prophet was not to foretell the future. They did that at times, and certainly spoke to future realities, but the primary role of a prophet was to foretell of the present reality, to proclaim the reality of the present condition of God's people and their relationship with Him, to tell the truth. The prophets were, in general, brutally honest people. They would just hear from God and then proclaim that truth to the people how they got it. It did not make them always popular, and seldom did it make them popular or well-liked. Sometimes it was just utterly heart-wrenching. Jeremiah, for example, was known as the weeping prophet because he didn't get any good news. I mean, he just was constantly, it was just heart-wrenching stuff. Habakkuk, and this, I know that's a strange book and can automatically kind of make you feel at a distance to think like, who in the world and what kind of name is Habakkuk? Don't worry about the name. Just know that we're entering into, we're privy to a conversation between Habakkuk and God. And the deal that we got to get here to make this relevant is Habakkuk is speaking on behalf of the nation of Judah or God's people. Okay, he's giving voice to their sentiments, to their realities, to the things that they're experiencing. And the reason that's relevant is because there is such a correlation between how Judah was back in 700 BC, that's about the time, 600, 700 BC, to now. It is amazing. Like you will see, because we're going to read, in the next 3 weeks, we'll read the whole book of Habakkuk together. And don't worry, because it's not that long. All right? It really is fascinating, absolutely fascinating, I think. So I want you to look, if you can find Habakkuk's near the end of your Old Testament. If you have your phone, which I did today, I normally bring my Bible up here, and so I apologize for that, and I didn't do that today. But it's a lot easier if you're on YouVersion. You can just click in the name. So look at that, Habakkuk chapter 1. Now let me say it this way. It's easy to get the notion that when God works good in our lives, it will feel and look good. That is an assumption that we come at God with. That when God is going to do something good, it will feel and look good. It'll just kind of be good. If God's doing good, then it'll feel and look good. Now, I know many of us have learned that that's not true. I know many of us have. But as we learn to live life in the kingdom, not just learning to live life for the king, but literally in the kingdom where there's experience between the king and his subjects, God's people and God, we're going to discover that if we haven't already, that the almost opposite is true. The greatest gains and the greatest good that come out of our interaction with God are usually born out of the greatest adversity. Now, that doesn't sound like good news initially. But I take the greatest example of that as being Jesus and the cross. That nothing looks more tragic than an innocent man being brutally beaten and crucified for no apparent reason other than a political agenda and a power play. Ultimately, that was the motivation behind the Jews' desire to utilize the Roman government to execute this man named Jesus. It looks horrible. I mean, but then on the backside of that, 3 days later, Jesus is raised from the greatest good that we'll ever know is the resurrection of Jesus. And perhaps what looks like the greatest tragedy of all mankind is the unjust crucifixion of Jesus. So I say that to say this, that when we want God to fix our lives, when we want things to get in order, we want things to get right, we do not need to assume that it's going to feel or look pretty on the front side of that. We do not need to assume that if things get worse as we're pressing into God, that we're on the wrong track. Because that would be a very misguided notion. It is very important that we are able to see today that God is using the prophet of Habakkuk even to speak to the people of God here at Covenant Baptist Church all these years later. God works great good through great adversity. So we're going to start this 3-week series on this cycle that we'll call the pattern of God's, or the cycle of God's grace. And by God's grace, I mean the working of good in our lives in spite of who we are, in spite of our failures, in spite of the fact that we don't even want it sometimes, that God has this cycle of grace that He works to bring us into relationship with Him, to refine our character and make us more like Jesus. And every time I say that, I want to say this. When we say make us more like Jesus, I would tell you, when we know what that's like, we want that. That's the preferable way to be. It's not boring. It's not stiff. It's not rigid. It's not strangely religious. To become like Jesus, that's your spiritual DNA. That's what God wants to bring to pass because that's what your design is. And there's not a better way to live or a better way to be than to be like Jesus. Again, I would say it, if we knew what that was like, we would prefer it and pursue it with all we've got. And so that is the goal of the church. It's certainly the goal of my teaching and admonition, is to make us want and desire to be like Jesus. Not just be good people, not try harder, not be more religious, not be more Baptist, but to press into God so that He would help us to become like Jesus. We've always struggled to see the big picture of what's going on in our relationship and with God in these terms. Always. And that's why God raises up people like Habakkuk. The men and women who walked with God a long time ago learned this cycle of grace. Usually didn't learn it fast. Usually had to learn it more than once. But God is and was and always will be persistent in this, bringing you through. So if you look back and you say, man, I failed. Those times that it was really hard, I just kind of bailed on God. I blamed God, got mad at God, walked away, stopped reading my Bible, stopped praying, stopped going to church. I just kind of backed away. And so, wow, God must be mad at me. God never stops this cycle of grace. He re-engages right where you are and right where you left off. I would tell you this, that the last point at which you said no to God, whether you said that consciously or unconsciously, or deliberately or unintentionally, you just said, nope, I'm done here. The next step you take with God will be right where you left off. The next thing that God will address will be the same thing that He was going to do back at the last time that you said, no, I'm done. That is good news. We don't fast forward and God say, well, let's just skip that part, whether that was 10 years ago or 2 days ago. He starts right there, and that is the cycle of grace. So you will see how that cycle unfolds, and you will see that it's tremendously good, and you will see, I think, that you will appreciate the fact that God does not fast forward and allow us to skip parts of this cycle. So I want you to look in your scriptures. If you haven't turned there, turn to Habakkuk chapter 1. Let me read the first 4 verses. I'm just going to read the first 4 verses, and so this is a conversation, if you will, quite literally, honestly, a conversation between Habakkuk and God. Now, it's going to start off with Habakkuk complaining. We can identify with that, I hope. If you are learning to be honest with God, you will be a person who begins to actually feel a freedom to complain to God, not stay there. I didn't say that's your primary mode of communication, but you will feel a freedom when you are confused and embittered or scared or angry or resentful to bring that real self to God, and that's exactly where Judah is. So it says this, in Habakkuk chapter 1, the oracle or the declaration of Habakkuk that the prophet saw. Here's what he says. How long, O Lord, will I call for help? And you will not hear. I cry out to you, violence everywhere, he's saying. Yet you do not save. Why do you make me see, or that is, why do you make me keep looking at iniquity or sin? Why do you, God, listen to his accusations toward God. Why do you cause me to look on wickedness? And he means only wickedness. Everywhere I look, I see it. Why are you just making sure that my eyes are fixated on all this destruction, he says next. Yes, destruction and violence are before me. All the time before me. It's all I see, is what he's saying. Strife exists and contention arises. And therefore the law is ignored. God, your ways are being ignored. Do you see this? Do you hear how Habakkuk's talking to God? God, did you notice that your ways are being utterly ignored? And do you care? Because it appears Habakkuk's saying, you don't. It's a pretty honest conversation he's having, isn't it? He said, justice is never upheld. Do you feel like that sometimes? I mean, I know that sometimes when it's hard and you're in pain, it's always or never. I mean, we don't see. Sometimes our pain causes us to see things as always or never, and that's certainly the case here. He's maybe overstating it, but he is saying justice never happens anymore. For the wicked surround the righteous. Therefore, justice comes out perverted. It's being twisted. Now, let's stop there, because that's where he stops. Here's my synopsis of those 4 verses that Habakkuk's saying, God, this is horrible. The situation I'm in, the situation we're in, this is horrible. And by the way, where are you? Because the assumption that Habakkuk has is if you were active and present, notice this assumption, because we'll identify with it. If you were active and present, if you were listening to me, things wouldn't be horrible. That is his logic, if you will. Things are horrible. Where are you? Because things continually be. They're so horrible, God, that there is no justice. Your law is being ignored, flaunted, and perverted. Where are you? I'm asking you to fix it. Habakkuk says, I'm crying out to you, but you, God, don't seem to care or listen to me. I hope in stating it in those terms, you can identify. And you should not be ashamed if you do identify. You should be thankful that we have a God whose shoulders are so broad, whose heart is so big, whose love is so immovable, that we can push against that with our greatest fears and uncertainty, even in our unjustified anger and frustration. And he doesn't go anywhere. We don't have to worry when we push against this God of love that he's going to back up and say, wait a minute, you're crossing a line here. Now, I'm not saying that God will let you go on like that forever. He will certainly, if we get in a rut and we start seeing and viewing him as the cause of, God is very adequate to redirect our thoughts. And he will do that, but he will not stop loving. He will not back away. He will not stop engaging. So as Habakkuk looks around, everything's terrible. So these are the times when you and I look around and we feel like almost nothing is like it should be in our lives, or even as we see the world around us. I see such a parallel today in the United States of America, just nationally. As we look around and we see the social issues, the social justice issues, whether we're talking about homosexuality or we're talking about racial issues, or we're talking about national security issues, or we're talking about just the horrid nature of the cost of health care, or you just keep going and on. It'd be easy for us to jump right where Habakkuk is and say nothing is right. Everything is bad. It's not going in a good direction. God, where are you in all of this? And so Habakkuk's lodging that complaint. He's helping us today amazingly identify. So we almost always respond by way of complaint of how bad it is and cry out to God to come fix this horrible mess. This is just it's not a bad way. It is our first step towards God. Now the key is going to be that we don't stay there, that we allow God to respond to us. So if you are a hit and run prayer, this is not going to work well. By hit and run, I just mean you throw out a complaint and then you leave. And you functionally don't give God a chance to respond to you, to clarify, to redirect, whatever. Okay, if you pray like that, if you just vomit on God emotionally and mentally, and then you're just out, it's not going to work well for you. I'm not saying that God's going to get mad and slap you on the back of the head so that you tumble down the stairs as you leave the room. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that you're never going to hear and get clarity on the situation. It's really important for us to learn to be honest with God, but listen to his response. Listen closely to his response. So, here's God's response to Habakkuk. So Habakkuk just said, this is horrible. Are you even listening? We identify, even if it's not right now, you can look back in your life and go, well, there were times I felt like this. Why did you let this happen? Why are you letting this happen? If you were really listening, this would all get straight and you would fix this, because there's no way in the world that you, being a good God, would allow these bad things to happen. Well, hold on with that thought. Because here's what God says to Habakkuk. The Lord replied in verse 5, look around, he's talking to Habakkuk, look around at the nations, look and be amazed. In other words, he's not saying, Habakkuk, look around and you'll just be dazzled. You're going to be utterly confounded. The word amazed doesn't mean that was an amazing comeback that the Royals had or whatever. I don't know if they've had an amazing comeback. They've had some amazing losses, I think. But it's not that kind. It's like you're going to be bewildered. You're just going to be utterly confounded. Look around and you're just going to be, for I am doing something in your day. See, he's answering his question of right now, are you even listening to me? And God's saying, you betcha. I'm listening. I'm at work. We're on the same page. You just don't see the second page. So he says, I'm doing something in your own day, Habakkuk, right now, currently. This is not a future reality. This is current. Something you wouldn't believe, even if someone told you about it. Even if I describe what I'm doing, Habakkuk, you aren't going to believe it. You're not going to like it, and you're not going to believe it. But since you brought it up, let's go there. Let's talk about it. He says in verse 6, I'm raising up the Babylonians who are a cruel and violent people. Now, I got to add something here, is that Habakkuk approaches God with the assumption that the Babylonians are the problem. They're the ones he's describing as the reason everything's bad. All the injustice, all the violence. He's talking about the Babylonians. So this is pretty ironic. Habakkuk says, hey God, the Babylonians are causing a mess here. I need you to do something about it. God comes back and says, listen to me and listen closely, because I don't think you're going to believe what I'm going to tell you. God says to Habakkuk, am raising up the Babylonians. I'm giving them this opportunity to do what they are doing. I told you that this is not easy, but this is such a typical description of the cycle of God's grace. He's not being facetious. He's not being mean or cruel. We've got to follow this through. So he says, and by the way, the rest of this is going to be God saying, I know exactly who I'm dealing with in the Babylonians. You don't have to describe them to me. Let me describe them to you. I know full well that these are not good people. All right? So God's using them does not endorse their behavior. God raising up the Babylonians is not saying, hey, they're better than you all of a sudden, although that's going to be Habakkuk's thought process. So he says the Babylonians, will march across the world and conquer other lands. You know, Habakkuk hears that, he's going, why are you going to let them do that? Why wouldn't you stop them? Why would you allow such a thing? Verse 7, they are notorious, God says, I know this. They are notorious for their cruelty, and they do whatever they like. Their horses are swifter than cheetahs. That's fast, by the way. And fiercer than wolves at dusk. Their charioteers charge from far away like eagles. They swoop down and devour their prey. On they come, all bent on violence. Their hordes advance like a desert wind, sweeping captives ahead of them like sand. They scoff at the kings and princes and scorn at their fortresses. They simply pile ramps of earth against their walls and capture them. They sweep past like the wind and they are gone. But they are deeply guilty. For their own strength is their God. You know, he just told him, I know who I'm dealing with. God says to Habakkuk, I know the horrid nature of the people that I'm raising up. And I also know this, he says, you think, Habakkuk, you think they're the problem. That's what you just told me, Habakkuk. You think that they're the problem. And so God's saying, it's going to be really, really hard to make sense of this, understand how this can be. God's working for the good of his people. So trusting God to be entirely good is essential here. And Habakkuk's learning that process. I would urge you have to settle this issue before you get into this position, or it gets twisted up. You have to settle the issue that you can trust God no matter what God chooses to do. And you have to know that God is not vindictive, that God is not spiteful, that God has not got a little bit of wrath left for sin that he's going to smite you with, because the Bible says he's poured out all of his wrath. It's all been expended on Jesus. So we have to know when the Babylonians come in, when life feels like it did for Habakkuk, and that God is allowing stuff or even raising it up to happen in our lives, that we have to know that God is good, or we're going to get really, really twisted up about this. And that's what God basically said. Habakkuk, I don't want you to be confused. I know what I'm doing. And I know the people that I'm dealing with. So when we don't understand what God is most concerned about, and that's what Habakkuk's going to be learning, it's what we're going to be learning. When we don't understand what God's most concerned about, we're going to have a very hard time understanding why God allows or causes these things to happen that he does. And there's some people in our city, you've seen the news, and I'm going to be specific, and there could be multiple issues like this, but some things that happen that no doubt people are reeling from and saying, God, why did you let this happen? I'm never suggesting that God caused the evil or caused the bad. But we can back up and just be right here with Habakkuk and say, I am so confused about what you're doing. Nothing makes sense here. And now you're telling me that you, God, are the ones that's raising up the Babylonians to do these horrible things. God, don't you know, Habakkuk says, they're the problem. And you're breathing oxygen into the fire. They're the problem, God. They're the issue. Listen, in God's cycle of grace, in this movement pattern that God has in our lives, the problem or the focus is going to be the condition of our heart before Him, and not the external difficulty that we're experiencing. Now, I want to differentiate something that I may have made fuzzy. There are tragedies that happen in life that have nothing to do with God's disciplinary action in our lives. I want to recognize that and say that. Bad things happen to people who did not deserve them, and God is not to blame. We can say, we wouldn't say it to people on the immediate backside of suffering and tragedy, but we can know that even in those situations, God works good. Not so that the balance is, like, oh yeah, well that was so good, I'm glad this bad thing happened. It's just we can trust that pain and suffering is redeemable in the hands of God, and it always is. Now what I'm talking about would be a really closer parallel to the injustice we think is going on nationally. Or when we see evil rising up in seemingly unstoppable ways, and we just think God should squish it, and God should cause it to come to a halt. We just never back up and say, I wonder if God is actually allowing this so that He could get at my heart. I wonder if I'm just not in enough pain yet to kneel and say, God, I need you. I wonder if I'm still stubbornly independent, thinking I've got a better plan than God. And I have to tell you this. I want you to hear this. It is hard for me to talk in these ways because I love to talk about the compassionate, gracious, loving presence of God, and I'm still talking about it, but these are different terms. That sometimes the most loving thing God will ever do is allow you to be in distress. Sometimes the most loving thing that God will ever do is to allow you to come to the end of yourself. And if it takes allowing the Babylonians be the Babylonians so that the people of God could become the people of God, so be it in God's economy, because He'll let that happen. Now listen, He's not going to let the Babylonians, you'll see, they don't run rampant forever and get off scot-free. No, they have a very designated purpose in this. And God's in control of all of that. But I'm here to tell you this morning that God's response to us can be so far from anything we would expect God to do or say, we don't even identify it. We don't even see it or understand that it's actually God's response to the very complaint that we've been making. Because we have a script, right? It's almost impossible to not have your own script. By that I mean, here's the problem, and then in your mind, here's the solution. So we said this, ironic, we said this in my G2 class. So here's our typical response to that. I'm in pain, here's my problem, I bring it to God, right? That's all good so far. I bring it to God, and then we say, God, I need you to do this. In other words, here's my problem, I bring it to God. God, here's the plan I need you to help me do. Now, if you don't hear the breakdown there, let me be more specific. It's okay, it is good to say, here's the problem. It is even better to say, God, I'm bringing the problem to you. It is bad, bad, bad to assume that you know the solution. And to ask God, unilaterally just ask God, to do what you want him to do. Here's the rest of that story. It is okay, according to Jesus in the garden, to say, here, God, is what I want. Here, God, is what I think. But that statement of desire has to be followed by, but God, I want what you want more than what I want, because I know you are truly good. It is a bad thing to go to the Garden of Gethsemane and say, Lord, if there's another way, let's go to that route. Bye. That's what we do. God, here's the problem. Here's the plan. I need you to fix it. Let me know when you get around to that. That's what Habakkuk been doing. That's why he's saying, God, you're not listening. God, you're not listening. God, you're not listening. First thing God says, I've been listening. I've been working. You just don't see it. Let me tell you about something that's going to utterly shock you. Your head is going to spin around like Daffy Duck when he gets shot in the face by Elmer Fudd. You're just not going to know what happened. You think the Babylonians the problem? I've raised them up because you have misdiagnosed the problem. I wish I were exempt from that statement. I hate this. I don't want to sit before you and say, I am probably chief among us at misdiagnosing the problem. I don't know how many times I've done this. Countless. Where I think I know the problem, I bring the solution to God and ask Him to help me carry out the solution. There's no backside to that with me sometimes. Like, but God, I know you know better, so whatever you want. Because I always thought of that as kind of an out for God, right? Like, God, this is obviously what you want. You want to heal this person. We need them to walk out of the hospital better than when they came. Everybody would give you glory. That would be great. What a plan. How could you argue with that? And then God lets a person die. And then that's the Daffy Duck moment where your bill's on backwards and you don't know which way's up, straight or wrong, and you have no idea if God caused that. Was He active? What is He doing? Because this does not fit into my understanding of good. That's writing the script and saying, God, here's how it needs to go. Assuming you know how it needs to go. We will do so much better in our experience with God and the transformation of the kind of people are if we can learn to come to God and say, God, here's what I want this. I deeply desire. In Habakkuk's case, this evil is driving me crazy. What's the problem, God? I think I know the problem. I think it's the Babylonians. But if I'm wrong, God, if I'm off base, correct me, and I'd be glad to hear that because you're God. I'm not. I'm just a prophet. You're the one that's supposed to be telling me truth and me proclaiming it. And I just want to make sure we got this right. See, we tend to expect God to respond to things like we would if we were Him. That's natural. It doesn't have to stay that way, and it shouldn't stay that way in your life. So let's go to the last part of this and close it up. So God responds to Habakkuk. First of all, I'd like to think if God responded to me that clearly, I would say, yes, sir, I'm very sorry. I would like to think that. But looking reflectively back over my life and my interactions with God during seasons of suffering, whether that was the death of my dad or whether that was the death of Kelly's dad or whether that was being told, hey, you need to uproot and move 450 miles to a place you've never been before as far as live, and that's Topeka, by the way. You need to go there, and, I've been here. I speaketh from experience of failure here, okay? I expect God to do things like I would do them if I were Him, and then God responds, and listen to how we typically respond back. Here's Habakkuk. By the way, let me just give you a Cliff Notes. He doesn't say, yes, sir, all good. Habakkuk's second complaint. It's just funny to read. Like, God just spoke to you. You're still complaining. All right. That's us. All right. That's us. Verse 12. Oh, Lord my God. It starts off good, by the way. There is humor here. You cannot. Oh, Lord my God, my Holy One. You who are eternal. Boy, this sounds great. Like, this is how you want to start a prayer. Surely you do not plan to wipe us out. He's already off track. Like, I hear you're God, not here to argue, but man, that idea of wiping us out by the Babylonians, that stinks. That's surely I misdiagnosed that, and surely I heard wrong. Then he says, oh Lord, our rock, You have sent these Babylonians to correct us. I get that. I understand that. Parenthetically, he's saying, I don't like it at all. I'm not sure about it. But I get it. I heard what you said. To punish us for our many sins. We've been so bad. But, anytime you make this declaration of truth and then you follow it with a but, that's a big but. I said it again. I told Braden always points that out. Dad, did you know you said big but again? I mean significant exception is what I mean. But you, God, you who are pure and cannot stand the sight of evil. Notice that he's trying to back God in the corner. And let me just tell you, if you didn't know this, God does not back into corners. You are pure. You can't stand the sight of evil. Will you wink at their treachery? You just going to let them do all this stuff? I mean, let them get it. You, God, you can't even look at evil and you're going to propagate it? Should you be silent, God? While the wicked swallow up people more righteous than they? This is just nauseating when you read it in light of everything. I mean, Habakkuk's sitting here saying, God, really? You're going to allow this to happen? You're going to let these evil Babylonians swallow up us righteous people who are your people, the people of Judah? I mean, come on, that doesn't sound right at all, God. Are we only to be caught and killed? Now, notice he's disintegrating here. He started off with, O Lord my God, Holy One, you who are eternal, O Lord Rock, you have sent these Babylonians to correct us. I get that. To punish us for our many sins. Verse 14, are we only fish to be caught and killed? Are we only sea creatures that have no leader? Must we be strung up on hooks and caught in their nets while they rejoice and celebrate? Then they're just going to worship he's kind of lost it here, right? They worship their nets and burn incense in front of them. These nets are the gods who have made us rich, they will claim. Will you let them get away with this forever? Will they succeed forever in their heartless conquest? God, I think you are entirely wrong. You start off good. You didn't end up real good. God, are you going to be silent while the wicked just swallow us up? Because, God, this really isn't how I envisioned this conversation going. I thought you had taken a nap and just took your eye off the ball. I would kind of tell you what's going on. You'd come in and fix everything. We'd be all good. It's not how this is going. In synopsis, this is a great way, hopefully, to get you to come back the next 2 weeks, because it isn't going to end on the warm fuzzies. It will get there, but it isn't today. Because all we've said so far is, Habakkuk says, God, this is horrible. Are you even listening? God says, yes, I'm listening. I'm doing something right now. You just don't even understand what I'm doing because you've misdiagnosed the problem. And so I need you to trust me. Oh, God, I trust you. You are God. You alone. And yes, we are bad. We deserve to be corrected by the Babylonians. But what the heck are you doing? We just fish? I mean, come on. You're just going to let them run rampant? By the way, God, he says this in here when he's talking about their fish and their nets. He says, by the way, God, if your plan is carried out, you know the Babylonians are only going to back up and they're not going to worship you. They're going to worship their nets. They're going to bow down to their nets and say, see how good our nets are. Oh, our nets are our God. That they're going to have false idols. It's not going to point them to you. And God's going to say, Habakkuk, I know. I understand. See, this is when we sense God's response and we see it unfold and it just doesn't match up with what we think he should do or allow to be done. Instead of bargaining with God, now we're trying to back him in a corner. You're so holy, you're so right, we're so good, they're so bad. All right, surely this isn't what you... And so our response is usually, this isn't fair. I just don't understand. And God, I'm going to pout and stay home from church. Until you make sense of yourself, I will not read my Bible anymore. That is the most ridiculous thing in the world, right? From this side of things, I've said this. Like, well, if that's how you're going to work, then why read my Bible? If that's how you're going to work, why should I even be nice to people? We got to back God into a corner. He's going, okay. I just go to church on Sunday and I'll fix this. And God's like, you're going to cut your nose off to spite your face? You're going to punish me for doing good? Really? That's how you're thinking? See, Habakkuk's understanding of the unrivaled sovereignty of God, that is, his understanding of God being able to do what he wants to do, when he wants to do it, and why he wants to do it, his understanding of that had reached a breaking point. And now he just didn't understand it, and it didn't go down easy. Anytime we are unwilling to trust God, really trust, lean in, depend on Him, to rely on Him to care for us and to do what is truly best, to bring about what is truly best, we are saying with our actions that we think there's a better way. And that we need to get God to agree with us on that better way. That is Habakkuk's second complaint. And oftentimes in the cycle of grace, this is where we stop. Because God doesn't play that game. And so we assume that we've been kicked to the curb, that God has abandoned us, that God's mad, that we just missed it, and somehow we just stop at the second complaint here. Like, God, I don't understand, so I'm out. God, this isn't even close to what needs to be done, so I'm out. God, are you still even listening? I'm out. Listen, learning to embrace hardship. Embrace it. Lean into it. Not run from it. Not beg God to get rid of it as quickly as possible or help you avoid it all the time. But lean into problems and adversity as this opportunity to enter into this transforming cycle of God's grace. That will change completely how you know and how you experience God in these times of adversity and difficulty. Entirely. It's not new stuff. It's been going on since 700 years before Jesus. It's a long time. God's never changed. His activity with us and among us has never changed. He is remarkably consistent. So, what your adversity, whatever your Babylonians are, whatever that is, it could be the national. Some of you need to stop watching the news. Some of you need to get off social media forever. Some of you need to just stop going to that friend that just allows you to run through the same tape of everything that's wrong in your life without ever redirecting you to say you might be the problem. Isn't that funny? How when we say, man, this relationship failed, this is broken, my boss isn't happy. I can't believe all of these people are so bad. And we never look and say, I wonder what the common thread is between my best friend, my boss, my neighbor, and my spouse. Why are all these relationships in trouble? What is the common... Me. Wonder if I have something to do with the problem. Even when you don't, guess where God's going to work? In you first. Even if everything is unjust around you, the transforming work of God is going to center in on your heart, not just fixing the problems. So let's go to God right now, and let's just daringly, bravely ask Him to show us what is going on in us. With whatever our complaint is, let's try to own our part today. That's just step one. Let's do it today. Come pray with me. Father, this is hard. And it's only hard because we have not settled in our minds and our hearts just how truly good you are. How bent you are on our good. Even though we can look at a cross, even though we can look at Jesus' brutally beaten body hanging by 3 nails on a wooden cross, bleeding profusely, barely conscious, we can look at that and not be convinced that you love us, that you're out for our good, because that cross was not for Jesus' good. It was for ours. And it declares once and for all the depth, the perfection of your love for us. It's not in question. So help us to look through the prism or the lens of the cross to our present problems, to the things that we are lodging complaint with you about, whether they're small or national or even global. Help us to look through the cross and say, you, God, first and foremost, are out for my good. It's not because I'm important. It's not because anybody in this room has deserved it. It is because you are the very essence of love, and this is what love does. It is for your glory. It always goes back to your glory. Our good is for your glory. Your glory is for our good. This is an immovable, unchangeable cycle. And so today, we do our very best to kneel down and look at our problem from that vantage point. And we trust, God, you would speak to us through the remainder of this book in the next couple weeks to help us to get a big picture on it all. It is in the matchless great name of Jesus that we bow. Amen.